Hi, how you going? I'm Red. Today we're going to be listening to some r/malicious compliance. Read by Red. Hope you enjoy. You need to check all of our food? Fine. So this happened like 7 or 8 years ago when I was jobbing at a driving service while I was a student. The driving service was one for people with disabilities that could not drive or walk on their own. Our main office was in the building of a housing working facility for disabled people. The two companies, our driver's service and the housing facility, were loosely connected as they were both financed by the same organisation. However, management-wise, they were clearly separated. We were about 15 drivers at this location, and we shared our lunch social room with about 10 caretakers. Since our schedules were horribly organised, the drivers often had idle time, so the social room was where everybody hung around waiting for work. One day my boss, call him Tom, brought cake to work because he turned 60. The cake was enormous, like a wedding cake could hide behind it twice. I can only imagine how expensive it must have been. At 9, every driver had eaten some pieces and there was still like 80% of it left, so Tom told the caretakers they should feel free to take some. Then Karen happened. She was something like the security inspector of the facility. So she had authority over the caretakers but no dealings with the driving service. Her job was to watch for potential hazards, organise the caretaker's schedule, and generally have an eye on everything happening. When she heard there was cake, she was furious. She and Tom couldn't stand each other, so she was always trying to ruin his day. In this particular instance, she claimed the cake was a health hazard as it contained cream, and she could not verify whether the cooling chain was never broken during transport. So she threw it all away. Roughly 400 euros worth of food just thrown away. Needless to say, Tom was less than amused. He got extremely angry. He was usually a very calm and gentle man, and this was the only time ever that I heard him shouting at someone. Still, there was nothing he could do. Karen could basically declare anything a hazard and take action how she saw fit, and her higher-up didn't really care. To make matters worse, she doubled down and demanded that every food that was brought into the social room had to be inspected by her first. Cue malicious compliance. Obviously, all the drivers were mad at Karen for upsetting Tom and for throwing away a perfectly fine cake. So the next day, first thing in the morning, 15 drivers went to her office, everyone with his lunch demanding she inspect it. It took her roughly 10 minutes looking at sandwiches and answering questions whether mayonnaise was too hazardous to be brought in. This went on for the whole week, each day our questions about hazardous foods becoming more dumb and degenerate. On Friday, it took her more than 2 hours to inspect our lunch, as we would collectively steal her time. Afternoon, she said she got the message and that sandwiches got a general okay and not to bother her with it anymore. Fine. The following week, we went out of our way to eat anything but sandwiches. Salads, cake, pretzels, normal lunch stuff. Every day there was a line in front of her office having their lunch checked, asking stupid questions whether this food was or was not too dangerous to enter the social room. Karen was losing her patience, becoming increasingly aggressive towards us, but still refused to apologize to Tom. Then, at the end of week 2 of food checking, Tom brought a bucket for lunch. When he entered Karen's office to have his lunch checked, like he did every day, and opened the lid of his lunch pot, the smell hit everyone in the vicinity like a brick to the face. Apparently, he had made some unholy mix of garlic, cream, pickles, and herring, which he called fish soup. It looked like what happens if you leave something dead in the sun for too long. all brownish and sludgy with some green specks in it, and it reeked twice as bad as it looked. Karen looked as if she would puke any moment, commanding him to remove this monstrosity from her office. Tom asked if she didn't want to check it, since he could imagine the cooling chain could have been broken during transport or sometime in the last 2 weeks. A lot of us drivers laughed so hard. I swear some nearly choked from laughter. This was roughly the time that Karen had to admit defeat. Food checking stopped immediately, and the following week Tom brought another cake. The professor asked me to share info that I did not want to share. A genogram is like a family tree, but with extra symbols, like a beer bottle for my alcoholic father, and lines connecting each person. The type of line dictates the type of relationship: close, smothering, distant, estranged, abusive, etc. I studied social work in school. I found myself doing 3 genograms over the course of my schooling. One for Intro to Social Work, one for Sociology of Mental Health, and then another in my last year. I have some not fun family history and trauma, so these assignments were never my favourite. But my teachers for the first 2 didn't pressure me to disclose, only what I wanted and be vague. One even said I could do a fictional family, lol. The last one did not. See, one thing we learned was that bringing up a client's trauma outside of a therapeutic environment can be harmful. We were BSWs, which are not qualified therapists. During intakes and assessments, we learned to tell clients that they don't have to give more details than they wanted to. There's a whole host of reasons behind this, but I'll spare you all the lecture. I brought this up in class after this teacher assigned an extensive genogram with an accompanying 5-page essay on what we learned about ourselves. A third of the class expressed the same concerns. His reasoning was, "You might be doing this with your clients, and you shouldn't ask them to do anything you wouldn't yourself." Not unless I get a graduate degree and become a therapist or a psychologist. The teacher also didn't give us an answer when asked if resources for therapy would be provided if this brought up any students' past trauma that they needed to talk about. Oh, and of course he added, "This will only be shared with me and is 100% confidential unless you choose to share." Literally, not any of our concerns, but I don't want to share any of my deeply personal business with this man. The assignment did not bother me as much as the hypocrisy of it all. I said, "Between class assignments and therapy, this will be my 5th one. Could I turn one of those in and be given an alternative assignment?" He wouldn't budge. He said I didn't need to disclose anything I didn't want to, but followed up with, "But I expect you to take this assignment seriously." And when I turned in a rough draft with about as much as I was willing to disclose, he said it wasn't detailed enough. All right, wanker, it's showtime. I have a lot of family trauma that is not mine to disclose, and I rarely ever disclose it. At least not with anyone who would ever meet the folks involved. My own is embarrassing enough, but definitely not as bad as some. But I put all that crap down on there and wrote about it. Then, the following week, the teacher asked if any students would share their genogram, if they're comfortable. My hand shot up. I'll spare you the details, but I basically gave the class a content notice to allow anyone to leave who may be triggered. A common thing in social work school. And then I just shared all of it. All of the relationships and why they were so messed up and why I hate my dad and my sister resents my mum and all that. Cheery smile on my face the whole time. The teacher uncomfortably thanked me for my bravery. A few students shifted in their seats feeling uneasy. Others smiled. Then my friend volunteered to share. She didn't like the assignment either, but she's not one to argue with teachers. Her presentation trumped mine. Girl had a real messed up family. And by the end, she was red in the face and everyone was super uncomfortable. The next person to volunteer to share was this girl who was in foster care. I'm not even sure if her sharing was malicious compliance, but hers was the most uncomfortable to hear. She started to cry at the end. Another student who also grew up in foster care started to tear up. The teacher cut us off after that. Another teacher overheard, and the following week we had some serious discussions in class. I and the other students who shared were referred to the school's mental health centre. Another teacher I had a good relationship with checked in with me, and I told her what happened. I can't tell for certain what went on, but it created a stink in their department. It's been several years since I graduated, but I heard there's now an alternative assignment for the genogram. So, lesson is, don't tell social work students to do something that you tell them never to do to their clients. And you don't get into social work unless you are traumatized AF. I hope you enjoyed that r/malicious compliance. Read by me, Red. If you did, please give it a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thanks so much.